Hey, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, my name's Gary Whittle, and I'm a trustee of the Rugby League Museum Society of New Zealand. And today I'm interviewing for the Society Roy Christian, Kiwi number 435. Just a brief mention of Roy. His full name is Fletcher Roy Christian, MBE, born on the 10th of October 1943. A very interesting Christian name and surname. Would you like to tell us about the family, Roy?
Family are going back to it's one of the easiest ones to look up in the history because you go back. It's my great grandfather was Fletcher Christian of Mutiny on the Bounty, and they mutinied, and he took half the crew in the ship to Tahiti and then over to Pitcairn Island, where a lot of them stayed, and half of them were shifted to Norfolk Island. And on Norfolk Island, they had a problem food-wise when the banana season broke down. So my grandparents came to New Zealand, and that's where I was born.
Well, what an interesting story. Thank you for that. Now, another bit of rugby league history in your family is that you're married into a rugby league family. You married
Yes,
Robin Cyril Plant, whose father was the Kiwi manager in 1963.
that's right, Jeff Plant, yes.
So you've been involved in rugby league really all your life. So you're a good Otahuhu boy.
Yes.
So how did the love affair with rugby league start in Otahuhu?
Well, I had 5 brothers and they all played league, and Dad said, well, you can play too. So that's how it was. I started when I was 5 because a lot of the folk in Otahuhu at that time followed league, and it just grew from there.
Now, where were you in the family with the boys? Were you oldest, youngest, or in
No,
the middle?
I'm the middle one.
You're the-
Yes. There are actually 9 children in the family, and I was the middle.
And then, of course, you moved on and you became a member of the Otahuhu senior team. Who was your coach back in those days?
Jack Wright.
So you would have learned a lot about a lot of skills from Jack as a young player on the way up.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. Actually, it was interesting to start because I'd given up football. I was going to give up and go running. I had a trainer, Murray Ray, who went to the Commonwealth Games twice, and he was training me, and we were trying to get myself to go too as a 400-metre runner. So I stopped playing, but then I got a call to the reserves. They were short of a player this week. So I said, yeah, okay. So I played this game, and they had a rule that you had to play 2 games before you could go up to seniors. So I played the next week as a reserve team. And the next thing I knew, I got called when I was at work. I got a phone call to say, look, Brian Reedy's been hurt in the trial matches down in Huntly. Would you take his place? And I thought, well, okay, I'll go. And then I went. So I actually never played a senior game before I made the top teams.
And of course, what's interesting is that people may not know that you were a winger in those days, but you made your mark as a centre in later life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it was interesting. I preferred playing centre because, in the first test we went to in England, the first trip, of course, it was a no tackle. And I played a whole test, and Brian Reedy was on the other wing, and we both played without touching the ball because in those days the forwards got the ball and they just kept that up the middle. So.
And of course, you would have had somebody like Munga Emery there that wouldn't have been given the ball to anybody else, would it?
That's right, Munga and Sam.
I remember them well. So I think 1966 or 1967, the game changed, and we then had limited tackles, and the game expanded to what it is today. Now, talking about, so that was your first tour in 1965.
Yes.
And then you also represented New Zealand in 1966, 1967, 1969, 1970, 1971 and 1972.
Right.
And can you tell me why you weren't selected in 1968?
Well, in the trial match beforehand, I had a young fella fall on my knee in a tackle. He didn't do it on purpose, of course. He didn't know what was happening, but it snapped my ligament in my knee, and that put me out for the tour anyway. They operated and said you need to take 6 months off. So that was it.
And of course, you played several interesting games for Auckland over those years. In 1966, Great Britain, where they just beat you 12-11. In 1969, 15-14 to Australia. 1970, you played Great Britain, and although you'd lost the Test series, Auckland beat Great Britain 23-8. And in 1971, we went back to a 1-point ball game again, with Auckland winning 15-14 after losing 15-14 in 1969. So there were some close games you played for Auckland back in those days.
Yes.
And we now come to 1971, which to me, that's the epitome of Rob Fletcher, Roy Christian. In 1971, you were appointed the captain of the Kiwi team to play Australia at Carlo Park. Can you tell us about that game, please?
That was a tremendous game, because I'm just trying to think who the Australian coach was. He was convinced that they had their best team and they would win. And afterwards, he was most put out because, as you know, we won that game, and it was tremendous. And it was the start of, in some ways, the start of a big career for people like Mocky Brereton and Philip Orchards and John Whittaker. And
yeah, of course, the score was amazing. It was 24-3.
That's right.
And they were lucky to get 3 that day.
Yes.
I guess the only downside of that game was that Eddie Heatley got injured, and it broke his leg, and it cost him a tour to Great Britain and France.
And it's a shame that he did, because we also lost him to New Zealand because he went to Australia.
That's right.
After that.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about that 1971 tour. Tell us about the first test.
First test, well, it was very interesting because we hadn't won many of the games leading up to that, because Laurie was busy trying out the different players in different spots, and the press had us down at losing 30 or 40 to 1 percentage, not 1 point, but anyway, we came out and when the fellas just put it all together, and it was tremendous. They played really, really tremendous.
Yeah, the one memory I have of that game, and so will you, that Dennis Williams, 18 years and 1 day old, first time he gets the ball, goes under a stiff arm and scores, and that really was the game.
It was tremendous. He was almost crying when he walked onto the field because he was so nervous. Yeah. But he went out and he was marvellous. And all of the games he played, he really played well in all of them.
And so that was another start you're talking about, the Wingers. That was the start of Dennis Williams' magnificent career with the Kiwis, and Auckland for Dennis, and Theatre too.
Yeah,
he was a marvellous player.
And the other interesting thing about that game was that John Whittaker played his first game ever at fullback. Laurie had chosen him at fullback because I'm not sure why he didn't pick the other two, but he decided that he needed to have John, and John did a marvellous game. I think he scored a try on that one too after Dennis had.
So just talk about 65, 66, 67, 69, 70, 71, 72. What was your favourite place to tour? Was it Great Britain and France or Australia? From a player's point of view and a tour.
I guess it'd have to be England in some ways, because Australia, it was enjoyable, but it was the 67 tour of Australia the games came so close. We had so many games in such a short time, and I think we had 18 games, and I know I played something like 14 of those games. And there was no time between because we were playing Sundays, Saturdays, and Tuesdays.
Whereas England, it was normally Wednesday weekend, wasn't it?
That's right.
But you were saying before with the tour that you hadn't won that many games in the lead-up. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to other Kiwis that have been on that tour, and they said the problem was we were playing teams like Wigan, St Helens,
Good
and they
times.
all had great halfback combinations that the test side didn't have.
Right.
And they said that was the problem we had. We'd go out there and you couldn't tell who were the good guys and who weren't. And it was always the halves always did you damage.
Yes.
But then, of course, when they picked the Great Britain team, they didn't have this combination.
No, and there's a lot in that because that's what was happening. The other thing, I remember coming back here after the 65 tour of England, and the referees asked me to come and talk to them about it. And they wondered what was going on with the referees, and I pointed out to them what happened. At that time, anyway, the referees, they were at whatever club they were with that they were refereeing, that club, they had the right to say whether the club was right for the referees to be pointed back there again or not. So, of course, any small mistakes in the game, it always went to the home side.
Of course,
So,
the referee back then was Sergeant Major Eric Clay, wasn't it?
Oh,
Who
right.
gave it to you
Yes.
all game, all tour.
yes,
He was a fascinating character on the field.
he really was, yes. And he seemed to be a nice bloke off the field too. That's one of the problems.
So getting back to Otahu again, I've done a bit more research here, and of course the biggest competition in Auckland Rugby League is the Fox Memorial that every club strives, and you were the captain of Otahu in 1970 and 1971 when you won the Fox. So that must have been a pretty proud moment for you and the Otahu club back then.
Well, it was at 71, of course, I wasn't here.
No.
I was overseas. So they were good moments and proud moments
were.
for the club. Yes.
Now, tell us about one of the things I've discovered about you is that you captain the New Zealand Maori Rugby League. Can you tell us the story behind that, please?
Well, in those days, when it started off, you may remember that it was called the put on to get money for injury.
That's right, Injured Players Day.
Injured
Maori
Players
versus
Day.
Pakeha.
That's right. And I guess there weren't many Maori boys playing in those days. So if you were dark, and I was put into the team. And Lummy Newton, the coach, he said, "Look, I've made you an honorary Maori for the." But it's interesting. Nobody really knew what nationality I was at all, because I remember reading in the newspapers not long after that, Roy was born in the Cook Islands.
Yeah.
I've never been to the Cook.
And you had guys like Bill Sorensen playing for the Maoris. It was a Tongan, so I mean, but
That's
you're
right.
right, because the shortage of Polynesian and Maoris playing rugby league.
Yes.
It was a great system to do
Oh,
to promote the game as well.
and we've got great crowds here.
Yeah, we
come
don't.
watch
I
that
can
game.
remember. I mean, there'd be 8,000 or 9,000 on
Yeah.
Injured Players Day. That was the day of the year. And of course, the other thing about that was the trial game for the Auckland team.
Oh, right.
If you remember.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the official trial game for Auckland.
That's
so
right.
guys came out and gave it their best. Now I've got a couple of other things here that I just done a wee bit of research. In 1967, you were the New Zealand Rugby League Player of the Year. What's your memory of that? You had that tour that year,
Yes.
and you must have gone pretty well to have been selected as Player of the Year.
Well, I got it. It came out as a surprise. I thought, I wonder who picked that.
I think you've been very coy there. You were a very, very good player. That's why you played so many matches. And we'll move on to that. I've done a bit of research. It's been quite interesting doing research into Roy Christian. He ended up playing 74 matches for New Zealand,
Right.
32 test matches, and scored 5 tries.
Yeah.
That's pretty good in anybody's league.
Well, I don't know about the tries part about it. So I get rubbished a few times by people who say, you only got 5 tries in all those games.
But centres weren't there to score tries.
That's right.
Centres were there to give it, the two guys, the two you mentioned, to give it Phil and Tamaki.
That's right.
That was your job.
And Phil broke the record.
That's right. He broke Tommy Hadfield's long-standing record on that tour in 1971.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just the difference. So no, I'm sure that you're not ashamed about 5. At least you scored 5 tries.
That's right.
I mean, we still have Kiwis that have never scored a try. In their lives.
That's right. Yes.
So looking back, would you have done anything different in your life?
Oh, I don't think so. No.
And of course, you were educated at Otahu College.
Yes.
And you then went to university. So what's your current occupation at the moment?
I'm a minister of the Presbyterian Church in Mangere.
Right. So how long have you been the Presbyterian minister of the church?
Almost 40 years.
40 years. So that was really a few years after you finished playing,
Yes.
you joined the ministry.
Yes. And I never wanted to be a minister.
No.
But I was going to the church at Otahu, and the minister there and 2 other ministers from other churches said you should have go into the ministry. I said, don't be silly. Anyway, they said, well, we'll put your name forward for it because you had to be processed first. So I put my name in, and I thought, well, there's no way I can get it because I didn't even get school cert in those days. And all I was interested in sport. But God has his ways of doing things, and next thing I knew, I was down Dunedin training. I had to do 1 year at university because I'd never done anything like that before. And even there, God was moving because I didn't know what to do, how to sign up or anything. And the day I went in to sign up, 2 blokes who were standing next to me came to me and said, look, you look lost. I said, I am. He said, can we help? So I told them why I was there, and one of them turned out to be an elder in one of the Presbyterian churches, and the other one was from high up in the Anglican church, and they had both gone back to the university to finish their degree, so they took me under their wing, and somehow I got marks.
God moves in mysterious ways.
He really does.
He really does.
Yeah.
That really says that.
Yeah.
Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. That has been an interview with Kiwi number 435, Roy Christian. Thank you for coming in today, Roy.
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.